Sup guys? In this video, I'll be going over the new ships and equipment from the new HMS event for the 8th Chinese server anniversary. As usual, I'll be aiming to give you my opinion after looking over the new ships' skills and not regurgitating every single detail. If you want to look over everything for yourself, there will be a link in the description to the Datamine that I'm looking at. Let's begin with Lion, the new ultra-rare battleship available for construction. She is surprisingly straightforward in 2025, with most of her kit being just stat and damage buffs that don't require you to jump through any hoops to activate. I did a rough estimate of her damage compared to Bismarck's Way, comparing her gun and on-fire barrage damage only. After taking into account all of her buffs, to Bismarck's Way's gun and on-fire barrage damage, averaged for the even and odd salvos because Bismarck has alternating barrages. From those sources of damage, Lion seems to output more than Bismarck's Way. I did not go any deeper with the calculations because I don't trust myself to be able to accurately account for every single detail, so this is enough for me to get a gauge of where Lion stands. Aside from the gun and on-fire barrage, Lion also has her timed barrage, which applies a unique burn effect, and a 10% buff for all allies on enemies that are debuffed, which in a boss fight you can essentially treat as permanent. She's also extremely tanky, but that doesn't come into play in PvE too often. Bismarck's Way, on the other hand, obviously has her black hole, buffs for other Iron Blood ships, and an extra bit of damage from her summon. Aside from the black hole, which is invaluable when it's needed, I think that the 10% all damage increase, as well as the highest damage, even before accounting for Lion's unique burn, will have Lion's output comfortably ahead of Bismarck's. While she doesn't have a reload buff like many other UR battleships, she can hold up to 2 salvos at a time, a perk only shared by Alsace, meaning that she won't have her cooldowns delayed by other battleships that are firing just before her. Her base reload is high enough to get off 4 salvos in a meta fight using a triple gun without much hassle. Overall, I think Lion will outperform even Bismarck's Way in situations where you don't need the black hole effect, and I estimate that she will be at minimum in the top 3 of the battleships in the game. While her barrage has similar armor mods compared to Bismarck's Way's barrage, a lot more of her damage comes from her main gun, so she doesn't have a significant weakness against any armor type. Just make sure to use the right gun for the right situation. If you're not sure of what gun to use on Lion, make sure to check out the in-depth Battleship's gun guide that will be linked in the description. Next up is the other ultra-rare ship of the event, Trafalgar. She is a jack-of-all-trades destroyer similar to both Z-52 and Laffy-2. Similar to Z-52, she fires a barrage every single time she fires her main gun, leading me to think that she will most likely be rocking one of the fast pea-shooter guns. However, the actual damage of said barrage is only 40, and for comparison, Z-52's barrage is 6 times 30 damage, which comes out to a total of 180. This is less than a quarter of Z-52's barrage against a single target, but it is Pierce 99, so it could have more value in campaign, although I still don't see it piercing more than a couple times. While her all-out assault is very powerful, her max and limit break perk happens to be reduced torpedo spread for some reason, instead of reducing the number of shots for said all-out assault. While this perk is not strictly worse than the other two, this is probably my least favorite part of her kit, as she doesn't really have powerful torpedoes. However, this is just a minor nitpick, as her real selling point is her extremely powerful, reliable, and unique evasion rate debuff. When the flagship fires, despite the wording here not mentioning it, she spawns a glow realm at the location of the priority target. There's no RNG chance to activate, chance to miss, timings to sync up to, or anything like that. This is a very powerful debuff that will massively increase the damage output of the entire fleet, and has been historically locked behind ships that were overall much weaker and restrictive, like Aurora or Sirius. This effect alone is going to make her a mainstay in any boss fight featuring an enemy with high evasion stats, which is many of them. Other than that, she also has 2 anti-air guns in her 3rd slot with high efficiency and good base stat, which puts her anti-air between Laffy 2 and Z-52's assuming everyone is running the most powerful anti-air guns. Something to keep in mind is that both Laffy 2 and Z-52's anti-air performance are highly tied to their Ghost AA guns, so if you don't have plus 13 Rainbow anti-air guns yet, Trafalgar is likely going to be the weakest out of the three in terms of anti-air, but not by much. She's also not a tank like the other two, but she's not particularly frail either. As long as you don't use her as your main tank in high damage content, she'll have no trouble surviving. And finally, it probably doesn't need to be said, but she also gives your HMS ships in all your fleets free and relevant buffs, which you can't really complain about. Despite a couple shortcomings in personal damage and the mostly useless max limit break perk, she is a very useful ship overall. Next up is Cleopatra, who is a stat stick light cruiser with a very powerful timed barrage. While her anti-air stat is quite high, her overall anti-air performance is nothing special with her mediocre efficiency and a lack of AA buffs. She has some buffs, about half of them restricted to HMS ships, so it's hard to quantify. Exactly how good she will be will depend on her damage output in practice, which I will put to the test when I have her maxed out. Next up is Glorious Meta. She actually looks quite strong, even though I haven't calculated her damage output. The loadout lacks dive bombers, which is a good thing as they are the least desirable plane type at the moment, given the available options. Although her barrages are not aimed, the total damage numbers look quite high, and they proc consistently. If she is able to proc her counterattack 20 times, which is approximately 30% HP lost across all the ships that have her Rose engraving status, she gains an extra airstrike, which is a huge increase to her damage. Take the current meta fight for example. Losing 30%, or you could just look at it as something like 10% HP on each Vanguard ship, is very realistic. Carriers typically get 3 airstrikes off for this fight, so an extra airstrike would be an increase of 33% total damage. Definitely no joke for an SSR. As for the purple ships, nothing really stands out from a gameplay perspective. Let's now take a look at Glowworm's Retrofit. I don't think the upgrades she got elevates her from meme territory. The problems that were there before are still there. Instead of 1.45k HP, she now has 1.6k, which means she'll still die pretty much instantly. While she got an extra gun mount, she only has 90 firepower, so it's not going to be doing much of anything. Her new skill makes her lunge at the enemy like Mogador, but unfortunately it doesn't root the enemy in the same way that Mogador does, so it can't really set up airstrikes at all. However, like Mogador, if you use her as the main tank, it can set up torpedo launches on auto, and since it occurs every 20 seconds, it works with more torpedoes than Mogador's lunge, which happens every 12 seconds and only works with rainbow mags and with ships under a certain reload. The only issue is that she is likely to die extremely fast if used as the tank. While she does gain damage immunity if she loses 8% of her HP after lunging, the window overlaps with her old damage immunity skill, so it's not that much of an upgrade. She also got a 10% heal upon killing an enemy, but it only procs once per battle, and with her damage output, getting the last hit on an enemy will not be a trivially easy task. Also, she didn't get an upgrade to her all-out assault. All in all, she's still a very weak ship. Okay, the final thing to cover is the new battleship gun. I think anyone who watched and understood my in-depth battleship guns guide should be able to instantly evaluate the performance of this gun, as I've covered everything there is to consider there. To quickly summarize, it is more or less a direct upgrade over the 406 Mark VII. HE guns are only used against light armor enemies, and with its just slightly higher modifier against light armor, it deals more damage even in the same number of shots than the 406 Mark VII. It also has a lower cooldown, and its shell speed is also higher, meaning it will have better hit rate against moving targets. This will be especially useful for a ship like Alsace, who not only doesn't have a reload buff, but also has a preload, which most of the time is fired when the target is moving, so the extra speed will be more noticeable. Okay, opening up the tier lists, I think Lion will most likely fall either in front of or maybe behind Alsace, due to just her straightforward damage and also having a universal damage buff for the entire fleet. I'd also put Trafalgar similarly either in first or second place on the Vanguard tier list, depending on her personal damage. As long as it's not significantly lower than that of Z52, I think the evasion rate debuff will be strong enough to put her ahead, but if her damage is much lower, then I would probably value the damage and survivability of Z52 more. Either way, whether she ends up feeling better than Z52 or not, she would definitely see a lot of use going forward. I also want to bump the Zevin Provincian to the S tier for a couple of reasons. The first is that her anti-air is actually higher than I previously thought. In fact, it's quite literally the highest in the game if you have 2+13 Rainbow 76mm, above that of even San Diego with her augment and Shimanto with face immolation. Something else that I forgot to account for is that the relative difference in damage between ships is actually masked by the anti-air damage. As a quick example, let's take a look again at the damage difference between Provincian and Shimanto. Going over the node stats of 3-star carrier nodes in 13.4, the total HP of the node is just slightly over 170,000. Since the main fleet was just 3 repair ships, we can assume that the surface damage being dealt by Provincian and Shimanto should be around 170,000, perhaps just slightly under due to the cross fleet and Vestal Meta's barrages. Looking at their total damage dealt, they sum up to about 290,000, so about 120,000 of that is from anti-air. I'm going to assume that they were credited with the same amount of anti-air damage on average, since they have essentially the same anti-air stat. And once we remove 60,000 damage from each of their averages to estimate their surface damage dealt, what we're left with is 89,000 damage for Provincian and 80,000 damage for Shimanto. This is a much bigger difference than without accounting for the anti-air damage. There are potential issues here, not with the way I'm accounting for anti-air damage, but rather the assumption that the sample size is large enough that both of them had the same amount of anti-air damage in their averages. In the end, while this points to at least Provincian comfortably dealing as much damage as Shimanto, I would still hesitate to say that she definitely deals around 10% more damage without having a much larger sample size. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you found the information helpful. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.